am Amy Vetter, and welcome to the Breaking Beliefs podcast. This valuable time is for you to pause in your day and go on your own self-journey. Discover the beliefs that are holding you back from living your best life at work and at home. Learn from the guests on this show as they share their inspirational stories on how they found ways to break internal beliefs that were no longer serving them. Because if you believe you can, you will. And our podcast begins now. Welcome to this episode of Breaking Beliefs, where I interview Dr. Keith Bernardo, a perinatal psychologist and one that specializes in human connection. Dr. Bernardo is a PhD in clinical psychology from the University of Texas Southwestern Medical Center. During his postdoctoral training, he worked in the field of perinatal psychology, solidifying his interest in human connection from its origins, maternal-fetal connection. Today, he works with a wide range of individuals, helping them better connect to themselves, others, and the world around them. During this interview, Dr. Bernardo shares his unique stories of the impact his parents have had on his career and life, and how that has helped him live a more authentic life. Welcome to this episode of the Breaking Beliefs podcast. Today, I'm with my friend, Dr. Keith Bernardo, and I'd like to start with Keith just giving us a little background on yourself for our audience to learn about you.
Sure. So I currently am a clinical psychologist via organizational psychology. So when I was in high school, I knew I wanted to go into the field of psychology, and by the time I was applying to colleges, I became really interested in large group dynamic work, meaning how a group impacts our behavior, how I can impact a group's performance, how I'm seen or think I'm seen by the group. And when I got into my graduate work at Columbia, I was in the Department of Organization and Leadership, I realized that there was a missing piece for me, which was I wasn't understanding intrapersonal psychology. So I asked my dutiful husband if I could go back and get a second PhD. After I picked him up off the floor and wiped his brow, I went back and got a clinical PhD. And during that time, in studying clinical psychology, I had this incredible reignition of what human connection is and can do. And that brought me down to, I'm sort of a reductive kind of guy. So I was like, well, when does it start? When does it start? Let's reduce it. And that brought me to perinatal psychology. So then I became really interested in all the research on maternal-fetal connection and how that connection impacts the developing architecture of the baby's brain and therefore how they enter the world. So it's a real niche-y little field. There's not too many of them. But I apply it broadly. So that's pretty much my...
Yeah, and this is where we met and talked for hours once we delved into what you did, because it's so interesting. And I think coincides so much to what we talk about on this podcast about these belief systems that we hold true of where do they even come from, and could they come from the womb and the environment that we were in even before we knew we were alive. So it's fascinating.
It is fascinating. And, you know, a lot of people, when I begin talking about this kind of thing, they think, oh boy, deck is stacked against the little infant, right? But it's actually not true. We look at it as a way of protecting against anxiety-induced, architecture. So there's strategies that we employ that help the parents understand who they are during the pregnancy and how to correct any, iterations following for their child. So it's a good field.
Yeah, it's amazing. So before we get into that, I'd really like to delve into you a little bit to understand how someone even wants to go into psychology in the first place, what really drove you. So as a little boy, that's what you had thought you wanted to do from day one, or was there ever another thing that you wanted to do besides this?
It's so funny because when I look back on all my little, my 8th grade yearbook and my high school yearbook, right? It always says psychology. And then
Wow.
8th grade also said computer science. Don't know what I was thinking about that. So I could barely get on Zoom today, right?
Yeah,
So,
we couldn't even get on video.
so thank God I didn't help the world with my computer skills.
Right.
So I knew from an early age that I was, I've always been a curious person. Like,
Hmm.
I used to tell stories of me writing to like different religions when I was in like 5th grade, when I was 10, and like people would show up from the Mormon church and they were like, "Is Keith here?" And I was like, "Who are you?" And so I was very curious about, comparative theology and philosophy and psychology. And, we always say, psychologists go into the field because they have a yearning to understand themselves more, right? And
Hmm.
that is true. That's true for me. But it has been really a fit, not based on my own experiences of myself, which is really useful, but just becoming curious about the world and how we view it and how you can make people's lives better by changing how they view it. So that's how it
Right.
happened. But I've never really not wanted to be a psychologist. So that's kind of cool.
Yeah, that is cool that you're living your passion. And I know we've talked a lot about your parents and your parents' influence. What kind of influence or support did they give you as you were making these decisions in your
Well, let me just say,
life? You have the best parents ever.
as a spoil alert, I do have the best parents ever, and I'm the world's biggest crier. So if I begin tearing up, I'll get a pineapple or something, and then we can all reconvene.
Okay, fair enough.
So my parents, I was luckily born of these two astonishingly open-minded, caring, loving, supportive people. Really, what they wanted for me and my sister, our whole lives, was us to find ourselves. Period. That was
And
it.
why? Was there something that drove them in their history?
Yeah, I mean, it's so interesting to me because my dad grew up, a pretty ardent Roman Catholic, right? I
Hmm.
used to play the novenas every morning. I was the church organist, and my dad would go to confession 3 times a month, and my mother would too. And then my father, at the age of 34, had a near-death experience. He had a pericardial sac injury that sort of stopped his heart from beating, and he became rather Buddhist after that. And he
Wow.
dropped out of, yeah, I know. And, he's this big, like, Italian guy named Dominic. So I was, like, not expecting a Buddhist bell to be in his office, but it was. And he began asking us children, which informed my psychology practice, by the way, of, who we are and how he was misperceiving seeing us and how
Hmm.
he wanted us to be seen by him and challenging us on perhaps why we weren't seen like that, right? Oh,
Wow.
crazy. I know.
That
I
is,
know.
I just want to pause on that. So that is unbelievable because I mean, it sounds like such a small thing, but how many parents sit with their kids and say, I'm not going to put what I think on you or what my perceptions are or my belief system and what I think you should be. Tell me who you are. That is such an important question.
Unreal, right? Which,
Yeah.
yeah, I mean, and that's why I'm in business because I'm trying to get people to be more like my parents, right? Because
Hmm.
when a person this is a Jungian psychological belief that when a person is born, we have a capital S self that resides inside of us. While we grow up, we have all these little S selves, and we call them introjects. That my Aunt Mary told me I was stupid, or my 5th grade teacher, called me, a crybaby, or
Hmm.
my 8th grade teacher said, "Boys don't cry." All those things, right? Before the prefrontal cortex is developed, starts around 13, ends around 20, 1, 2, 3. We believe those small S selves, and our
Hmm.
job in life is to cancel those out and to find the capital S self. And for some fascinatingly lucky reason, my parents always wanted to get us to the capital S self as fast as we could, you know? Weird.
Wow.
I know. Yeah.
Yeah. So what did you tell? So if he sits down with you and asks you, who are you? How did you even understand how to answer that question at
Oh,
that age either?
very badly.
Yeah. I mean, that's a really hard question, even at any age, right?
And I would say, I would start with like cursory things like, oh, I'm a boy, or, I love tennis, or,
Mhm.
I'm an athlete, or whatever it was. And then slowly I was starting, as I grew, I started understanding what my father meant. Like, not what I did, but who I thought I was. And,
Mhm.
and that's when my dad taught me the word, I'm curious. So my father said, maybe you're a curious person. And I said, yeah, I think that sounds right. I am a curious. How cool is that? And he would give me these sort of, my mother too. My dad was more probably vocal. My mother was
Mhm.
a little less shy, more shy. But yeah, he would instruct me about how to think about myself, and he would support initiatives that he even knew were wrong. Like if I said, well, when I was in college, we started talking about my orientation. I'm married to my husband, Rob. And he actually said to me, maybe you're a gay person in the world. And I was like, no, I'm not. But he was so supportive, they both were, about every aspect of my uh, sense of meaning. That's the other thing that they always talked about. They never talked about like personal happiness. My dad
Mhm.
always said, well, what is meaningful about that? Because life is going to throw you some curveballs that are not going to feel happy. So happiness is a fleeting thing. Vicissitudes of life can negate happiness sometimes. But what we can do is find meaning. And my dad was the one who taught me to search for meaning,
Mhm.
regardless of what the event that life throws your way may be. And I think that was the greatest, other than curiosity, gift he gave me.
Yeah. Well, and we also talked about them actually helping you to come out.
Yeah. Oh no, pulled me out of the closet. I was holding the door shut.
I mean, that's probably the most unique story anyone's ever told me. And I've thought about it a million times since. So I would love for you to share it because I think it's such an honor to your parents. And again, pulling away from what they want versus what you are and can be.
Yeah, so and I was born in 1965. So when I was growing up, being a gay person in the world had three strikes against it. It was called it was a criminal. It was criminal. It was a sin, and it
Mm-hmm.
was a psychological deficit or
Mm-hmm.
disorder. Right. So the idea of identifying with being a criminal, being sinful, and having a disorder was just not a cool path for me, right?
Right.
I was, fairly, I would say, non-sexual person, so I wasn't like promiscuous or I wasn't acting out. And then I met a girl, and I decided this is it. This is how I really loved her, and I thought maybe I could commit. And then my parents, several months, called me to dinner, and they said, "Hey, look, it's great, but we think you might be homosexual."
I mean, that's fantastic.
I know,
It's
I know,
just-
I
I
know.
mean, it blows your mind, especially at that time in the world.
And especially given their Catholic upbringing, right?
Exactly. Yeah.
It's kind of an amazing thing, and I fought it for a while, which is a testament to my failings, not my parents. And I was just very
Why did you fight it? So if they saw it, why were you fighting it in your belief systems?
well. I just felt it was a strike against my happiness in the world. I was fearful that it would mark my success in some way. Like, would it matter if I was gay, if I was going to try to get into a PhD program? would it count against me? I mean, it was a
Right.
real fear to hear about that, and certainly as a, hitting the jackpot on all the other identities, white, male,
Right.
middle class family. I was just very nervous that a sexual orientation of gay would really hinder me in my life. And the truth of it is that the opposite was true. Like owning who I am and owning the power in that and the beauty in that and just letting it be really created the avenue for my success. I can't imagine what it would be like to feel fraudulent all the time. And I lived a fraudulent existence for a while.
Well, and I think it goes back to your father's original conversation with you is not what are the list of things you are, what brings you meaning in life, because those things aren't necessarily like, you were concerned about the titles, the PhD, the outward appearance of who you are versus what creates meaning. And they actually lived the lesson they were teaching you by helping you along that too.
They certainly were. There was certainly, there's a theory in psychology, it's called social learning theory, it's Bandura, where kids learn more from behaviors than words. So if your parents smoking and they say don't smoke, the kid is likely to smoke, right? So my parents not only were supportive verbally, but through their actions. My dad remains, my mother died a year ago, August. My dad remains an amazingly authentic guy. And wherever I go, he's in a really lovely facility in Connecticut now. And every time I go up to see him, everyone's like, oh my God, your dad is the greatest guy. Everyone loves him. He's the kindest person. And it's true. Like he's just, and he's not afraid of being my dad. He's not afraid of being tender. He's not afraid of being expressive. He's not afraid of demonstrating sorrow. He's not, and he's an 83-year-old Catholic Italian guy. You know what I mean?
Right.
So it was a beautiful model to see.
Yeah.
The most beautiful story about it was when my mother died. She died very unexpectedly. She was very healthy. She died in her sleep. And at the funeral, my dad was so sweet. And instead of sitting in the pew, he decided to just go up and be with mom's ashes during the whole thing.
Aww.
And he wasn't embarrassed about sort of kissing the ashes, and he didn't care about the community. He cared about what it meant for him in his past life.
Exactly. Yeah. Well, and it really broadens out to so many things where, in the business world or organizationally, we're so worried about our titles or the outward appearance, or a lot of times in corporations, when you're talking about organizational behavior, leaders will say, we, create this kind of work environment. This is the type of culture we want. But again, even working into business life, if you're not living it, your people don't believe it, and it actually creates more friction.
That's right. Or like, when I was an organizational psychologist, one of the greatest challenges I felt was to do a culture change initiative, right?
Right.
Organization that had a dysfunctional culture and try to change it, right? And it's a really difficult thing. And the reason it's a difficult thing is because, people join an organization because a culture either aligns with them or doesn't, or they stay or are able to stay. There's no attrition or there's no firing because there's some sort of alignment. Mm-hmm. Now, there's some streams of theory that say, well, that means because authenticity at work breeds fit at work if the culture is correct, right? And I think that applies broadly to life. I think if we're authentic, like really working on it all the time to be as authentic as we can, yes, there's constraints. Yes, we put limits on ourselves, right? Sure. But if we can be as authentic as we can, I believe, this is just a personal belief, we will find ourselves attracted to those environments that support that authenticity. I mean, it's so odd how I met you, right? We're at the gigantic conference.
Yeah.
With like thousands of people.
And both of us tapped out.
Exactly.
We found each other because we're at a bar by ourselves tapping.
We're like, and right? And I believe that, and we had a synchronicity and an alignment. that happened because we were both being ourselves. We weren't trying to put on something at this conference or trying to become something at this conference that we weren't, or
Right.
whatever. We were just us. And that's a fortunate thing because now I'm connected to you in a real way,
Right.
not an artificial way,
Yeah. And I think people, especially in work environments, are so afraid to expose who they are. And really that's what connects people, is when they can relate. I mean, I know it took me a long time to figure that out because, I grew up as a CPA and I had this impression of what was accepted as a CPA and how you had to act or what you could say or couldn't say. And by accident, I actually, had this other life where I was a yoga teacher that no one knew. And I had a client walk into a class I was teaching, and then the whole class got thrown off because the people that took the class had no idea I was a CPA. And then the client was like, "You're the teacher." And so the whole thing, but then I realized
Axis and downward dog.
Yeah. Then we were just all connected more because I was more multidimensional. And I was like, oh, I can bring this into my life and not feel like it's a bad thing.
It's amazing how many of us, not all of us, grow up with the lemming syndrome, right? We become lemmings. We think, well, if I become the lawyer that I'm supposed to be in the world, or if I become the CPA that I was told I need to, not in your case, but told I need
no,
to.
it was absolutely my case.
Pitching, or if I get that PhD,
right,
whatever, or we compensate or overcompensate for personal feelings of deficit. Like, I'm sure being gay forced me in some odd way to overachieve, because then I'll be okay in the world. I'll be okay in the world. And really, that's not true. Like, the truth is that the more you sink in your own skin, the more you're yourself, the more unique you are to the world, and the more you can give the world. And the more people respond to that because they see in you authenticity that they can live themselves. That's what I think.
Well, and I do think when you can use your experiences to relate and connect with others and even see yourself in somebody else, so that, it's a reflection back. So it's healing both ways, but it's also connecting where you have a better understanding of how to nurture someone else or how to give them space or find meaning and that sort of thing, rather than trying to understand something that maybe you don't understand. And I think going back to your father even asking that question, even if you don't have a related experience, is giving someone space to be able to communicate that to you.
Exactly right. Yeah. When you were talking, I was just thinking too that, I love this saying, and I use it with parents all the time, which is, when you're on an airplane, they say, put your own oxygen mask on before you assist your child.
Yeah.
And at first when I heard that, I was like, you're letting the child suffocate?
Exactly.
Well, the truth is that you suffocate, you ain't good to nobody, right? So it's the most generous act a parent can do, or a friend can do, or a spouse can do, is to know and understand and live who they are first, right? In order to provide for another person, or a friend, or a colleague, or a son, or whatever. So, I always try to live by the motto, saying, put your own oxygen mask on first. I am the king of self-depletion. I will run myself ragged.
Yeah.
I will drive 12 hours to see dad, come back to DC, no sleep. What? Like, I am good to no one, right?
Right.
So the big challenge I have in my life, and I'm trying to, I'll tell you about that in a second, but I'm trying to negotiate this with myself, is that self-care first is not selfish, it's generous, And that's why Rob and I bought this. We're just officially moved to Virginia with a beautiful lake out there and 11 acres and bunny rabbits and deer everywhere. I feel this amazing sense of renewal every morning, rather than living in this big concrete jungle. And I was done with that.
Exactly.
You know?
So what have you seen as far as your experiences, your belief systems shifting over time from your learnings, and how they've affected the people around you, whether that be your patients, your relationships?
How long have you got? Okay, so well, I was thinking about this prior to our talk today, and I would have to say the biggest shift I've had, and it's not been linear. I've
Right.
certainly gone like this, but the biggest shift has been to be absolutely okay with caring for myself first.
Mm-hmm.
Now, I initially thought that meant being selfish or self-involved, or I don't know what it meant, or that people were not going to like me, or
Mm-hmm.
that I was going to, be seen as too isolated. The opposite happened. Self-care begets almost less self-care. If I take a half an hour every morning and meditate, and this is just my thing,
Right.
meditate, I write in a gratitude journal,
Mm-hmm.
just to get my head on straight that day. By the way, there's great brain science around the mental state of gratitude. It's not just a fluffy Oprah idea. It's
Right,
real.
right.
Not that Oprah's fluffy. I love Oprah. But that half hour that I take for myself before I even touch my pups and
Right.
say good morning to Rob makes me require less self-care. So when I'm running myself ragged, I used to be the kind of guy who saw 14 patients a day.
Oh, wow. That's a
Yeah.
lot to take in, not only the work, but to take in everybody's hardships
Yeah.
as well. It's a
And I
lot
thought
just on
it
you.
is, but I
Yeah.
thought it was noble, right? I thought, oh, this is noble because I'm helping many people out. No. I was useless to
Right.
patients by the end of the week, right? And I had to have a talk with myself going, okay, how do you be more useful? You be more useful by caring for yourself a little bit more.
Yeah.
And that's the trajectory that I've noticed a change. I was a workaholic. I
Mm-hmm.
was definitely a schoolaholic.
Yeah.
Yeah, you're right. If I wasn't unbelievably busy, I used to brag about the fact that all I really needed was 4 hours of sleep a night. That's all I needed. What? Uh, and we know sleep is everything. Restorative sleep is everything. So I used to
Right.
brag about that. So that shift has not only allowed me to enjoy life more, to slow down a bit, but I think it's made me more effective at what I do and when I do it.
So did you feel, because you were saying if you weren't busy and you were trying to fill that, did you feel that you weren't as successful if you weren't busy, or that you weren't achieving something, or you had too much time alone in your head? Like what was it that why you had to be that busy?
D, all of the above. Right? Like all the above. Because I felt like if I wasn't like running myself a little ragged, it felt like I was not on the achievement wheel. So, there's a thing in psychology, I'm sure you've heard of it, it's called the hedonic treadmill. You know what that is? So there's this like, to tell the listeners, it's the pursuit of constant need for more and more and more and more. And you become like this little gerbil on this wheel, just running and running and running and running and running. And you think, one thing, so I thought anyway, that was the way to feel successful, to feel accomplished, to feel self-identified, to feel purposeful, to feel validated by others.
Mm-hmm.
That's a big one. That's a big one for me.
Yeah.
To feel like, wow, Keith's an awesome guy. I used to love when people would say, wow, you're like Superman.
Yeah.
And the truth is no, I'm not like Superman.
Yeah.
I'm the opposite of Superman. I'm terrified that if I stop, I'll be nothing. So it was informed by all those things you suggest, and probably a big marker of identity for me too. I don't know what it's like to be anything other than I am in the world. White, male, gay, middle-aged now. I don't know how many 110-year-old people there are in the world. So perhaps I'm not middle-aged. Uh, but so I knew that for me, being male meant to be productive. For me, being male meant providing. For me, being male meant no breaks, work, 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 work. And
Mm-hmm.
that's just has changed dramatically for me. I
Yeah.
think it's any better.
Yeah, and when you say that term about, people would say, oh, you're like Superman. I've had people say that in my life. Is like, I don't know how you do everything you do, but it was kind of an insult, not necessarily like when you're looking into it, you're like, I don't think they're looking at it like, that's great that you're doing all that stuff. It's kind of like looking at you like, why are you doing all of that? And I know it took me a while to realize that I needed it, and not to feel bad about some of it, like know when my limits were, but some of them were outside activities or whatever. But I realized it was something that filled me up that I needed to do in order to be better during the day or with my family or so forth. But it took me a long time to not be hard on myself as well.
Yes. Yeah. Well, because shedding who you think you are supposed to be in the world,
Right.
which is developed before you have analytic powers to investigate that, right? You
Yeah.
know, we're the little credit card part of our brain, prefrontal cortex,
Mm-hmm.
doesn't come online until 13. So you have a lot of time to believe other people's ideas of who you are that you internalize as your own. So to shed that can feel monumental, right? It can feel like the death of you, but
Right.
really it's the rebirth of you, I think. And people in my experience anyway, in my practice, clinical experience anyway, it's not people do it on their own time, and some people are able to shed their old skin quickly, and some people it takes a very long time.
If
And
ever.
if ever. Yeah,
Yeah.
it's really true.
Mm-hmm.
And I think there's a lot of I don't know if you agree with me or not, but I think there's a lot of factors that contribute to that. There's cultural factors,
Mm-hmm.
there's familial factors, which are also cultural. There's self-identifying factors. There's like this whole slew of factors that count into why that is. I was on the slow side. I mean, I definitely felt in search of me uh, for years, despite the cultural support I had to be myself.
Right.
Interesting, right?
It's the human condition.
Yeah. Or what if I had parents that didn't tell me to be curious?
Right.
They'd still be an unhappy slave to the corporate world.
Right.
Married with 3 kids. I don't know.
Yeah. No, it's true. Yeah. So going back to the beginnings part, which is a big part of what you do, even in utero, I would just love you to explain a little bit about that effect. And, it's obviously an experience. If a mother is in a traumatic experience or stressful experience, and they don't have you, it's something you can't control, right? And so how do people even identify that might be some of the beginnings of what they have to shed as they get older as well? So maybe you can explain a little bit about what you do more in depth and then get to that. Yeah.
Yeah. So basically, I always go back to this one study that I read that completely sort of tunnel visioned me on this field, which was a study that was done at Columbia when I was there during 9/11. So this study examined women who were pregnant at the time, who experienced a similar loss of someone during the World Trade Center disaster.
Mm-hmm.
And they took these women and they followed them for 10 years longitudinally. And their kids, with everything else statistically, the same, their children were born with an increased baseline level of anxiety simply because their mothers were anxious during the pregnancy.
Mm-hmm.
And I was like, oh man, that's powerful. Like the biochemical neurotransmitter juice that was fueling the mother was fueling the little growing person, right?
Mm-hmm.
And then at first I thought, well, that's a downer. Like, energy. You know what I mean? Like, That's not good. But no, the truth is it's good, because what it helps people do, parents who experience, there's going to be things that happen. It helps them understand how to manage, understand themselves, manage their stress, manage their anxiety in a healthful way. And then once the baby's born, there's corrective parenting experiences that help the child learn how to self-soothe or modify. And the brain is very plastic when they're growing, when the kid is young. So it's all corrective. The mistake is when people don't think that those kind of things matter.
Right.
Anxiety in pregnancy doesn't matter. Depression during pregnancy doesn't matter. Isolation during pregnancy doesn't matter. And it in fact does at the neurological construction of the brain aspect. So like your brain is shaped, the neuronal architecture of the brain is shaped through all of that, chemical juice that's spinning around in there. And I find when parents understand this, it's a light bulb moment for them, because they go, wow, I have the control, even if things go wrong, to manage this better. So one of my favorite cases was when I was living in Dallas, and this fantastic young couple who I was enamored with decided to finally have their child, and they did everything right. They got their lives in order. They were both successful. They knew themselves. They did a lot of internal work on themselves, and they finally decided to get pregnant. And then during the pregnancy, it was determined that the baby had dwarfism, and it kept vacillating between a deadly kind of dwarfism, that has to do something with femur length and hip ratio and all that, those measurements, and a non-deadly dwarfism. And I've never seen a couple working so hard to understand what to do about this tragedy that they were seeing.
Right.
And then when it became official that they decided that they were going to have to terminate the pregnancy because it was a deadly dwarfism. At the very end, they said it's not deadly.
Wow.
You can have the child.
Oh my goodness.
Yeah, it was tough for them, and they decided to have the child. And it was beautiful to see how their healthful management through the struggle of the pregnancy actually informed how they were as parents and how they could deal with this, challenge that this little person was going to have throughout their entire lives. And it was a great thing, because other people would have not managed it or been conscious enough to manage their own feelings during the pregnancy, right? They would have been concentrating on their little baby.
Well, and we talked about some examples in your work before too, where if the parents changed their mind and felt no love for that baby that they were going to give birth to, how you get that parent to accept and love that child, even if the child's going to die or whatever it is going to be, so that they're okay once that baby's born as well.
I had, I don't know if I told you about this case that I had, where this amazing young Black woman had conjoined twins. Did I tell you about this?
Yeah, that was the one I was thinking about. Yeah.
Yeah, she had made these beautiful little fetuses sort of monstrous in her head. She was terrified of them. She was very nervous about giving birth to them, and yet she couldn't abort. She didn't believe in doing that. So we had a real journey together through, a good 6 months of how to reconceptualize these two babies, and how, if at all possible, could they be separated. And it was an amazing experience for me. And she became, through our work together, softer and kinder and more caring. And then the most beautiful thing happened. I got paged the day of engagement, right? I got paged, and she asked that I come for the delivery, because she was going to deliver. So
right.
I was in the delivery room. The babies were, and we had all this, prep work. Like, do you want them wrapped? Do you want to see them? Do you want to not see them? And she said, I want to see them. So, and they were conjoined at the head, but they they were born so beautifully. They almost looked like they were praying together.
Mm.
And she was so tender with those kids when they were born. And they
Aw.
lived only a few minutes. And then they gasped and they would gasp and then they passed away. And she held them on her heart. And as long as she could, she didn't want them gone. And that experience of loving and letting go
Mm-hmm.
completely uh, stopped her from going into a trauma state. She
Right.
could have had those children, thought they were horrific, never saw them, and that impact on her life would have been tremendously negative. But
Yeah.
she didn't. She did it. She like found a way to reconceive of who these little creatures were in her life, not creatures, babies, in her life, and how to love them.
Mm-hmm.
And that's I get goosebumps now thinking about it because I saw this terrified person become loving to whoever that was inside of her.
Yeah. And it's such important work because then she can be peaceful as well. And I think one of the things I took away from a personal standpoint, listening to some of the work, because a lot of situations you're in is extreme situations. But when I think about my own life and um, my parents and knowing probably the thought process while my mom was pregnant and so forth, and then living my life and believing those belief systems. And when I got pregnant, what I was struggling with being pregnant. And then by the time my son was like 3 or 4, when you say take care of yourself, I went to therapy and said, I don't want to repeat what happened to me. I don't want this to be the type of family that I have, and the breakdown that I had to go through in order to change that trajectory. Because I don't know I mean, I had 2 preemies. I'm not saying it's my fault. You have no idea. But I definitely was very stressed about this, having my own, children, and worrying about, would they be in those same situations and so forth. Not that I was the same person, but you never know. And so the work that you have to do to undo that, and to, those are experiences that they don't even relate to because that hasn't been their life. But when you say take care of yourself first as a parent, it's really important work. It's hard work. Um,
Very difficult.
yeah, but you can't deny that you're not having those emotions and feelings while you're pregnant, or becoming a new parent, even if you've had no trauma, is just traumatic.
Yeah, right. It
Period.
is. End of story. Yeah, paragraph, right? No, it is. It's like, but what you said is true. Like it's actually, I'm going to take it one step further. It's to do your child a disservice if you don't take the time to understand what you're feeling, why
Mhm.
you're feeling it. Feelings are not just a transient cognitive state. They're a
Right.
biochemical state, right?
Yes.
Cortisol goes up and a whole bunch of hormonal reactions and neurotransmitters change. So it's a medical phenomenon, feeling something, right? And the only way through something is to feel it. You have to be in
Mhm.
it to get through it, right? One of
Yeah.
my most challenging aspects when I started working at Baylor Hospital in Dallas was, it's terrible, but like when a family it was all set with their nursery and the name picked out, and they would suddenly have a stillbirth for no expected
Mhm.
reason, no medical reason. And my first job was to help them grieve. So it felt terrible because your human instinct is to comfort. My
Right.
job was to help them talk about what
Yeah.
this meant. And it was horrific tears. But through the feeling of it comes the healing. Now, will they ever fully be the same? No. But like you can't deny an emotional state if you were to get through the emotional state, right? You got to open the closet and see the monster. And I think that's a service you have to do not only to yourself, of course, but to your child or children.
Well, and it's the gift your father gave to you by not taking you know, even though it came a little bit later, he still had to break through his belief systems. You don't maybe know all the details of the work that he went through to do that, but in order to change the kind of experience in life that you have, else you repeat that through the generations. I remember, I mean, it was horrible. I would go to therapy for like 3 hours a week and I was like crying all the time. And I went to the therapist one day. I'm like, okay, I heard there's drugs for this. Like, like, please give me something. And he's like, no. He's like, there's a place for drugs if there's something wrong. He's like, there's nothing wrong. You have to feel this. You have to go through it. Else find another therapist and that will give you the drugs you want. I'm like, okay, I'll go through. But but it was important that he pushed me, you know, because it is our natural inclination when things are tough to back out because it's just too much.
Now, just as a little bit of a doctor responsibility, that does not say that there's no such thing as clinical depression.
Of course, yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
So if a listener feels like their emotional state is creating, you know, feelings of self-harm, isolation, sadness most of the time, etc., go seek help. Because you may be in a clinical depression, and that may require, often does require medication, which is great. Medication is not taboo for people who need it, right? We often, as psychologists, try, you know, it's a three-legged milk stool. It's medication, psychotherapy, social support. If one of those are missing, the stool falls over, right? So for the worried well, we don't need to medicate. We need to feel, right? If we're stable enough and strong. If we click over into a clinical state, do not be embarrassed about going to your GP.
Oh, of course not.
Right?
Yeah.
Never. So I just need to put that caveat.
No, I think that was his point was, you know, if I thought you needed it for some medical reason, I would give it to you, but this isn't that. Like this.
I've told a lot of patients that, and they were not happy with me.
Right.
And I helped them get like curious about why that is. And it's because it's hard.
Yeah.
It's hard facing your own emotional states.
Yeah.
It's not fun.
No.
Feeling grief. It's not fun feeling a chaos or lack of control. It's not fun being anxious. I get it, right?
Right.
But your management of it over the long haul depends on how we manage it now. And if you have the capacity to feel it, to tolerate it, guess what? It'll hijack you less and less and less and less and less. And then you become a different person in the world. You understand what your emotional life means, how to manage it, what not to be terrified of. I've never seen, in a non-clinical population, I've never seen an emotional state hijack someone to the point of disability, when we all fear it will. If I start crying about my mother's death, I'll be lost forever. It's a real feeling. But the truth is, it may feel like that. It's not true. It will not happen, right? And get support, social support.
Yeah, no, I love that three-prong assessment, and it is really important to get help. And it took me a while to get over my fear or belief system that was a weakness, to go ask for help. And it's really important.
Can I say something about expectations?
Mm-hmm.
So if I had to like boil it down, this is sifting through all, but if I had to boil it down with parents and becoming pregnant, or parents and having a baby, or parents and raising a family, or parents dealing with themselves, it's all about how many and what kind of expectations we have, and how we diminish those. There's a saying, expectations are inversely correlated to serenity. The more expectations we have, the less possibility that we'll be serene. You know, and I always use the example, you know, Rob and I were taking a vacation one year, And we read about this hotel, so expensive, and it was like the best, and our expectations were so high, and we got to the hotel, we were like, the next vacation we took, which just happened, oh my God, we both had the same week off, let's just drive somewhere.
Right.
We found this little bed and breakfast, and it was zero expectations. We had the greatest time ever because we weren't expecting to have blueberry muffins with butter. Right? So the same applies to how we view our kids. Most parents expect their kids to be straight, right? That's what happens. So when the derailment happens, it's often painful. But if we can examine what our expectations are about ourselves and about those around us and diminish those expectations and get to the core of who someone really is or wants to tell us or identify us or who they are, that's serenity. And it's hard because it's hard to get rid of all of our expectations, right?
Yeah, definitely. That's the yoga work.
Right? I know. Right.
Yeah, when they first started talking about non-attachment and no expectations, when I started yoga, I'm like, I don't know what they're talking about.
Maybe CrossFit. Maybe I should go into CrossFit.
Exactly. Maybe that would be a better route.
Yeah, maybe, because I can expect a lot. Right? It's so interesting, right? I know.
Yeah. So, I'm sorry,
So,
what were you going to say?
I was going to say, don't you find the outcome in your work the same, right? When expectations are diminished, things seem better, yeah?
Yes, absolutely. I mean, and I would say that in my own life, when I finally let things go, you know, and even when things, I mean, because you can't have expectations of life because you cannot control things that happen around you. But I think the biggest thing as far as that I've learned over time with yoga that's helped me is to just step back, pause, and breathe and be like, okay, like this isn't a point to respond. This isn't, you know, this is like, I just need to assess and observe what is happening right now, how I'm feeling, so that I still put out the kind of energy that I want in the world, rather than it letting me take me to a place that I'm not proud of myself.
I have to tell you, I wish you were my teacher for my first yoga class, because you were howling with laughter. Because I had never taken yoga, and I was like, I thought it was right. And I was bound and determined to do a handstand.
Oh, on your first class? Yeah. Okay.
And I was like,
right.
And the good teacher going, you know, you don't need to. Handstand. And I was like, no, I do. You don't get it. I need to do this. Because it ended in a disaster. You know, it was like a Lucy episode. I fell over and like hit someone's water bottle, and their mat got wet, and I left.
And never came back. And then you blame the yoga studio. That's the best part.
Let me do a handstand.
And it got all screwed up. Yeah. Yeah. Well, I could talk to you forever, obviously. But I'll start wrapping it up a bit and ask you a few questions that I like to end these episodes with. They're just rapid fire questions. So you pick a category: family and friends, money, spiritual, or health.
Family, friends. Okay.
So things or actions I don't have that I want with my family and friends.
I want Rob to move here permanently, which is going to happen January 1st. Everything else, I got to say, I got it.
You're doing awesome. Yeah. All right. So things or actions I do have that I want.
The most wonderful, supportive friends, my incredibly rock solid, funny, sweet, kind husband, and the experience of my dad passing gently and beautifully.
That's very nice. Things or actions that I don't have that I don't want.
That I don't have that I don't want. Oh, I don't want more stuff. I don't want more. I don't feel like I can handle more intimate friendships. I know we all think, well, but
Yeah.
I have a core, and I don't want. I never want the feeling of isolation. That's
Yeah.
for me. I always want to feel deeply connected to my friends and family. If
Hmm.
there's a rift, if there's, I don't want it.
Yeah.
I'll correct it.
And then lastly, things or actions that I do have that I don't want.
Yeah. I know this sounds like lame complaining, but overscheduling, I
Yeah.
still fight against. Um, I feel a pressured need to
Hmm.
attend to everybody all the time, working
Right.
hard on that. I trust that if I don't call Brenda every single day, all's good. You know what I
Right.
mean? So
Yeah.
that's it. Yeah, a pressure to be seen as the best friend. Not
Yeah.
the, you know what I mean?
Yes. I totally know what you mean. Yeah. So as we close up, is there anything that you want to make sure people take away as a message from this conversation today?
Yes. Who you are, capital S self, matters more than anything you've ever been told about who you should be in the world. If you can do one thing for yourself and your family and your world, discover what that capital self S means to you. Because then there's only one of you, and the world needs you, not a performance of you. The world needs you. And when you discover that capital S self, your life will lead you to places that you can't even imagine, and that will give you a sense of purpose and meaning despite the vicissitudes of life that you would not expect. That's my take on it. And you pass that on to your children.
I love it. I love it. Thank you so much for spending
You.
time with me on
Oh, I loved it.
this.
I felt like we're on for like 3 minutes.
Yeah, exactly.
It's been 2.5 hours now. It feels like so quick. So great. Thank you. I'm honored to be with you.
Oh, this was awesome. So thank you so much. And now it's time for our mindful moments. And I could probably record a whole nother podcast just on my takeaways from my interview with Dr. Bernardo. He's one of probably the most fascinating people I've ever met, and just immediately had a bond with him as soon as we met last summer. And I really want to just step back and maybe take in pieces of the story that he told, because there is nothing more inspiring than I think the stories that he talked about with his parents. That we come from this world where we've got so many different religions and ethnicities and just ways of living our lives. And a lot of times there's just not that place of understanding, that place of compassion, not necessarily that you have to agree with one side or the other, but that you can just be empathetic to each person and not have to put your own opinions toward it, that you allow someone to be just who they are. And these stories about his father are just one of those things that makes you stop in your tracks and think about, how could I go about something differently or think differently? And I really want to go back to when his father sat his sister and him down to ask them, who are they? And I think that there's just such a big impact in that story that a lot of times, especially when we have children or people that work for us or work with us or friends, that we decide who they are. We start creating that definition based on our own perception, based on our own opinion, and our own past experiences, rather than sitting down with that person, being completely open and not putting our judgment on who they are, just allowing them to describe who themselves. And when he talked about that story, when we get asked who we are, initially we're going to say our resume, we're going to say our accomplishments or the things that we do in life, but not necessarily the meaning behind what we do. Like, why do we do what we do? And the fact that his father kept pushing them to get to that point where he was like, I'm a curious person, that I need meaning in the things that I do. And when you get down to those core level beliefs, and you might not even realize that they are there, it actually helps drive your decision making as you go forward in life. That it's not just about the title or just about the career or some objective or goal you're trying to get to personally or professionally. It's about what you are trying to feel or elicit from making that decision in your life. That it is going to create something in your life that's so much better than it is right now, or continue you on the path of what creates fulfillment for you. And if you don't understand that underlying layer, we start making decisions in the dark. So really getting to that and just creating that for yourselves, I think, is really important. The other story that, and I could hear the story a million times, is the story about his parents actually bringing him into, before he got married, with their, opinion that he may be gay. I don't know of a story I've ever heard like this in my life. And again, this comes back to the theme of how can we just not put our judgment, our own opinions, our own feelings, but be there for the other person, for what they need. And, like I said to Keith, what his parents did was really hard, because they could have let him go down, get married, have grandchildren, until he eventually figured it out later and had a lot of struggle. But they let go of any selfish feelings of their own, and wanted to be there fully for him. And it's just such an inspiring story, and it can be applied in so many different ways. It doesn't have to be an extreme, change in your life, but it is a way of going about life that we have to practice, because it doesn't come naturally to any of us. That our egos are going to come up, our own personal needs are going to come up. It's our survival skills. But when we can actually put all of that aside and be truly there for the other person, not try to justify our position, not try to justify our feelings, but be there for what somebody else's needs, isn't that really what life is all about? And so really going through life in this unselfish way, that when we do that, that actually creates more for everyone. That when we're generous, we will get that back. Now, a lot of times bad things happen to good people as well. But being okay with how we take care of others, but also not forgetting to take care of ourselves, which was a big point in what Keith was talking about, is that we have to not feel like we're selfish if we take care of ourselves, because when we take better care of ourselves, we're better for the people around us. And we can be there for other people, not feeling like we're losing anything when we're there for somebody else. But if we aren't taking care of ourselves and doing self-care, like he talked about, meditation, gratitude journals, or whatever that is, walking, whatever you need to do to help you get that feeling of fulfillment and release, so that you're not just always busy in your day, and you're not running through your life ragged and not paying attention to the little moments or what somebody else may need. So as you leave this episode, I think it's really important to think about, in the areas of life, whether that's at work or at home, what are the areas that you are trying to control too much? And where can you release that control and allow for people to be who they need to be there for what they need, create the space for them for what they need, but allow yourself to release those expectations. And like Keith talked about, it's the inverse to serenity, that we need to allow ourselves to just release this, be there for ourselves. But when we do that, we can create so much more meaning for the people around us because of it. Thank you for taking the time out of your day to listen to the Breaking Beliefs podcast. I hope you will take a moment to pause before entering back into your day to reflect on this podcast and note 1 to 2 actions you are inspired to do from today's conversation that you could incorporate into your life. To read the full blog and listen back to this episode or any other, you can find them at www.amyvetter.com/Breaking Beliefs podcast and related videos on my YouTube channel. For daily inspiration, follow me on Instagram, Twitter, Facebook, and LinkedIn at Amy Vetter CPA. I hope that you will choose to like this and subscribe to this podcast on iTunes, Spotify, and more so that you can join us for more inspiration on our next episode.